Hello and welcome back guys. Today we are going to start new story, Walker's World, A Boy's Stand, written by Anthony Tyler 9. So let's begin. Izuku woke up after a long day that he just didn't want to think about. Looking around the place he found himself in, he muttered to himself for a moment before looking at the living room he was currently laying within. He heard the sounds of struggling in the house before moving towards the spot where it was getting louder and louder. Reaching the barricaded stairway, he looked at how it was moving a lot and was very concerned that whoever was stuck on the higher area of the house he was in danger. He removed the barricade. And as soon as it was opened, he found a little girl and a much older person who was definitely looking worse for wear. She had light brown hair that extended just a bit under the back of her head, her eye color was a dark brown, but she was very expressionable. She glared at him with concern as well as readiness to kill him if he attacked when he spoke to them in a different language. Koko wa doko. Watashi wa Nihon ni iru to omoimashi ta. Where am I? I thought I was in Japan. Izuku asked, as the woman stared at him for a second. What are you talking about? Can you speak English, kid? The woman asked, holding a small baseball bat. I can speak English. I was asking you where I was. Izuku replied as the woman slowly lowered her guard. You're in America, kid, Georgia. If that is what you're wanting to know, and if you want specifics in terms of cities, you're just outside of Atlanta. The woman said, as Izuku nodded. Is your hair dyed green? I've never seen green hair before. A small girl asked with a curiosity in her words. And my hair is naturally green. I don't know why it seems so unnatural. Izuku replied. Cough. Cough. I don't feel so good, Clementine, I need you to take this kid with you to the treehouse. The woman said, as Clementine, as Izuku heard, looked at the woman. Sandra, why are you sick? Clementine asked, worriedly. I got bit by one of those F-airs out there. And I don't know how long I have before becoming one of them, just keep yourself safe. Can I trust you to keep Clementine safe whilst I take care of whatever this is here? The woman asked. I don't know why you would want to trust me. Didn't you just meet me right now? Izuku asked, as the woman smiled. Yeah, but I won't be able to be around much longer. The woman said, as she pushed Izuku and Clementine away from the stairs. Keep this barricaded and get into the treehouse. The woman said, as the two kids rebarricaded the door to the stairwell. As Izuku led the little girl to the treehouse, he allowed her to climb up to the small building first as he kept an eye on the surroundings. He made sure to grab a couple of knives beforehand so that he wouldn't be completely without something to protect both himself and Clementine. Literally 2 days after the two hid inside of the treehouse, they heard the sounds of something breaking inside the house and the woman screaming. The woman, who Clementine had informed Izuku was named Sandra. With the two of them hearing her scream in agony, they knew something bad happened to her. As the days moved forward, Izuku had left the small treehouse to get supplies from the nearby buildings. Just so that Clementine could stay fed and prepared for the world around them, and it was during this time that Izuku had come across weird humanoid creatures. They were seemingly dead as they were decayed, rotting pieces of flesh that came after the living if they stayed in an area for too long. He had collected enough supplies to last him and Clementine about a few more days of living as they ate canned fruit and some other canned beans and vegetables. It wasn't until the two heard the sounds of a car crash nearby that they were startled out of their near sleep as they looked out the window of the treehouse. Izuku made sure that he went out to check out what happened and if whoever crashed was alright. He purposefully made sure that Clementine waited inside of the treehouse as he went to investigate. He knew that this probably was a horrible idea, but he wanted to make sure that it was just the undead who were coming nearby. Using his slightly muscular frame to climb over the wooden fencing, he made his way to where the crash happened. And what he saw was completely terrifying. He heard the sounds of a man screaming in agony as he rushed to the area where the screaming came from. Immediately hiding behind a tree to hide his presence from the undead monsters, Izuku watched as the cop was pulled by the strange human undead monsters had strong-armed the police officer to the ground and began to eat his entrails. It nearly caused the young man to just throw up from the sight alone, but at least the undead monsters left the cop lying on his stomach. Once the undead left the area finding nothing to really interest them here at all, Izuku made his way to the vehicle as he looked inside the driver's side. Pulling the door open, Izuku had lifted the man onto his upper back and carried him around towards the fence. He made sure to grab the keys for the HNDCFFS by the cop earlier as he brought the older man to the fence. Once he got near the fence itself, he walked around the community walls as he made it back to the house which belonged to Clementine herself. Once making his way into the backyard of the house, Izuku laid the man on the ground underneath the treehouse as Clementine looked down from above. As Izuku inspected the man's leg, he found that the cut on the leg was slowly becoming infected from being incapable of being cleaned and dressed. Once Clementine returned with the materials, he immediately set to work, his mother's lessons about taking care of someone who's hurt coming to mind. He immediately grabbed the hydrochloric acid in order to clean the wound first. As soon as the acid-like alcohol had hit the man's leg he immediately woke up. "JRNG." The man growled as he looked at Izuku. "Stay down. And keep your voice down. The monsters will be coming if you scream like that again." Izuku warned. Sorry, just that really hurt." The man said, as he slammed his fist on the dirt. "Sorry about that, sir, just cleaning and dressing your wound," Izuku stated as the man nodded. When Izuku continued to clean the wound, he took a closer look at it. There were no teeth marks of a bit on the man, so that was good, and as he brought out a needle and thread, he began to stitch the man's leg up. The man watched in awe at how a 14-year-old kid was patching him up better than he himself could patch it up. "From how you were able to clean and dress my injury, is it a bad thing for me to believe that you had to deal with this kind of injury before?" The man asked, waiting to start a conversation. "I was bullied for most of my life, sir. I had to learn the hard way to take care of myself. But my mom taught me everything I know about cleaning and stitching up wounds," Izuku replied as he stared at his work. "It's not much, but it's better than just leaving it open to the world to infect it," the man said, as he stood up. "What's your name, sir?" Izuku asked, leery. "The name's Lee. Lee Everett," he said, as he looked at the small house nearby. "The name is Midoriya Izuku, this is Clementine," Izuku said, introducing himself and the little girl nearby. "Do you know what's happening?" Lee asked. "No, I just showed up a few days ago in the living room of Clementine. I don't belong to this place," Izuku said, as Lee stared at him. "So you came from Japan? I can tell from how you look," Lee questioned. "Yes and no. I'm not from this dimension's Japan. I'm from an alternate universe entirely. But it's probably for the better that I don't return back to my home," Izuku said, as Lee stared at the boy. "You weren't treated very well there, were you?" he asked, kneeling to Izuku's height. "No, but I feel like being here would be better than being in a place where my presence causes a burden on everyone else," Izuku said, as Lee nodded. "Well, let's just leave this place. It's probably better to stay on the move," Lee said, as Clementine looked at them both. What about my parents? They might come back and find me gone," Clementine asked. "We will leave messages around the place. If they come back, then they will follow the messages and find us eventually. After all, a parent couldn't ever leave their child alone for too long, right?" Izuku asked, as Clementine nodded. The trio had begun to walk around the area towards the metallic fence blocking them from the street nearby. They heard movement as well as grunting from the road as Clementine and Izuku moved forward quietly. Lee did the same thing as the two as they got a look at the newcomers to the neighborhood. Watching as they were struggling to push a bunch of cars out of the way, they decided to help them move the cars without alerting the undead around the place. "Come on, Chet. We need to get these cars moved so we can leave. We can't have these walkers catching us unawares. One of the men said, urgently. I'm trying, Sean, but I'm having a hard time pushing these vehicles. Chet replied. Do you need help? Izuku's voice asked, as they turned around immediately. OSHT. Chet called out, hiding in the trunk of the truck. We're not infected. We're just looking for some help. Lee said, as he de-escalated the situation. Sorry for being so cautious, we're trying to get these cars out of the way to get back to my farm. We were just scavenging around the place and couldn't find anything to use for food and other supplies. The younger man said, looking at them. We can help you. Lee said, as the younger man, Sean, looked at him. You don't look like their father, who are you? He questioned. I'm just some guy who was saved by this green-haired young man. And I'm just trying to make sure that nothing bad happens to them in return. The boy saved my life. Lee said, as Sean smiled. Well, let's get these cars moved, we have to get out of here as fast as possible. Sean said, as the four began to push the car. Once they had managed to push the car out of the way, Chet made a call saying that a horde of walkers were coming for them. Climbing into the truck and leaving, Izuku watched as the city of Atlanta disappeared into the distance. About a couple of hours of driving later, the small group of survivors had arrived at a large farm that was seemingly peaceful. Chet left to go back to his home on another farm nearby, whilst everyone got out of the truck just as a man wearing green farming clothes walked up to them all. Thank God you're safe. The older gentleman said, as Sean introduced them all. Hey Dad, this is Lee. And these are the kids he's trying to keep safe. Can we place them in the barn with the others? Sean asked. Well, I don't see why not, looks like you got hurt there. From what it looks like, however, someone had cleaned and stitched your wound up. The man said, as Izuku rose his hand slightly. My name is Midoriya Izuku. And I used as some medical knowledge my mom taught me. Izuku said, as the man gave him a nod. The name is Herschel Green. And I am the owner of this fine farm you are standing on. Whoever taught you these skills are definitely very good at their job if you are capable of doing this on a taller man. Herschel said, praising Izuku's work. It's not much, but I just did what my mom taught me. Izuku said, blushing in embarrassment. It's a good skill to have in this world. Being very good at medicine is something that is bound to be useful down the road for injuries. You all can sleep in the barn, we don't have much in terms of bedding and all. Herschel said, as he walked towards the house. Dad, I think that we should increase the defenses around the farm. The dead are running out of people in the cities and will be coming out here at some point, and the farm won't be safe anymore. Sean said, as Herschel nodded. That won't be necessary, Sean, but do what you like. Herschel dismissed but aloud. You don't understand, Dad, the dead out there are a lot worse than what the radio makes it out to be. You didn't see what it was like, Dad. Sean said, as Izuku looked at the two. I never said not to increase the defenses, Sean, just make sure that you don't over-prepare. Herschel said, as Sean nodded. Later on in the evening, Izuku laid on the ground next to Clementine as the little girl snuggled up to him as she faced Lee. The two were talking to one another, not that Izuku cared all that much. Lee was showing himself to be fatherly during the drive to the farm with Clementine. He wasn't jealous of the little girl, he'd had a father of his own, but his own left him when he was 4 and never talked to him again. He'd made peace with the fact that he'd never get another father figure in his lifetime. Lee even made some jokes about manure or whatever in the building based on the smell, and Clementine made a comment about her parents again. Falling asleep to their calm voices, Izuku fell into his dream world as he felt memories come to the surface. He was standing at the edge of his classroom as he looked out the window at the city nearby. He smiled to himself before he was accosted by someone he knew. What the F are you looking at, Deku? We're not done with our earlier conversation. A familiar voice called out to him. What do you need, KK Kaken? Izuku asked, completely scared. You know, I am a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to my backstory. So I am going to give you one single warning. Don't come to UA, or I will kill you. Kaken said, placing a palm on Izuku's left shoulder, singing the uniform. Another ruined uniform. Izuku thought to himself. Hey, what's this? Hero analysis for the future. You're still doing those stupid notebooks, you DMN nerd. One of Kaken's lackeys called out, holding his notebook. PL, please give that back. Izuku called out, trying to reach for it. No. Kaken said, as he pulled the notebook into his hands and destroyed it. The boy was seen walking out of the classroom as Izuku stared at the notebook in the small koi pond below the window. But as he turned to look at Kaken again, he found the boy with a very decayed and arrogant expression on his face. You know, there is a way for you to become a hero. Kaken's decayed voice called out. What's that? Izuku asked, with a small ray of hope. Just pray you get a quirk in your next life and jump from the roof. Maybe then you might be able to become a hero in the next life. Kaken said, as he watched Izuku's face morph into fury. He activated his quirk to quell Izuku's building rage at the boy's words. But before Izuku could even show his rage at the friend's words towards him, Izuku found himself standing in the house where he'd found Clementine and her babysitter. He found Clementine staring at him with concern as she looked very worried for him, and before he could even react, he heard the sounds of a walker behind him. Turning to face the threat, he found the walker version of his mother growling at him and reaching to grab him. Gah! Izuku screamed as he woke up from his nightmare of memories. Breathe. Breathe. I am going to look around the place. Izuku muttered. A new day P2 After waking up from his nightmare, Izuku left the barn as he looked at the outside of the building. The sun was slowly rising in the distance as Izuku sat down on some hay bales nearby to the barn itself. He slowly allowed his breath to catch up with his speeding heart in order to calm it down from such a horrid nightmare. Looking at the rising sun, he heard movement behind him and immediately turned around to find Herschel standing nearby looking at him. The man shrugged his shoulders and moved out into the cornfields in order to collect some of the wheat as well as corn. Izuku would watch the elderly man for a bit as he heard movement from the barn and looked in that direction. He saw a man who looked like your traditional grandparent. He had a normal mustache that went from under his nose to the sides of his lips as he smiled Izuku's way. The woman with him was plump but had blonde hair. It reminded Izuku about his own mother before he was forced to appear in this world. Shaking his head, he smiled at the woman as she smiled back. Trailing the two of them was a small boy with freckles on his face as well as bouncing around the place. If there was a massive difference between the two parents and the boy, it was the massive energy difference both didn't have. Morning there, pal. Name's Kenneth. That right there is my wife Katja and my son Duck. Kenny said, smirking at Izuku. D-dodging or Q-quaking? Izuku asked, as Kenny chuckled. Quacking mostly. But I love that boy, and in terms of my name just call me Kenny. The man said happily. Oh okay. Izuku said, as the man ruffled Izuku's hair. As the man left Izuku alone, the boy watched him walk over to the barn as two other people woke up from inside. He overheard them talk for a moment before hearing Sean stating that he was going to work on the fence. Following the younger man, Izuku went to assist him in building the wood barricade for the fence around the farm. For a few hours Izuku and Sean were fixing the fence in Herschel's farm as they prepared for the worst to happen. Sean had managed to get a few pieces of the wood planks on the fencing as he was cutting more wood. Izuku grabbed some nails and started to hammer some wood planks onto the fence itself as Sean talked about something to himself. Izuku spent his time thinking about his life before entering the life of Clementine and Lee. He had his reasons for keeping his own past quiet. But he'd rather not have anyone here to change their opinions about him as a whole. He'd already dealt with that in his own world. He doesn't want that to happen in this world too. Finishing the part of the fence with some boards being hammered on, Izuku turned to Sean as the young man wiped some sweat from his brow. He looked over at Izuku with a small smile as he gave the boy a thumbs up and then turned to walk away. But before he left entirely, he turned back to Izuku to give him some words before he went to start on the last part of the fence as a whole. "Hey, can you tell my dad that I'm nearly finished with fixing up the fence? He should be in the barn last time I checked." Sean questioned as Izuku nodded. "Do you want me to see if we can get anything to eat before you start?" Izuku asked. "No thanks, I'd rather get that fence finished before the day is over. Can't be seen wasting daylight and anything," Sean said, waving at Izuku whilst walking away. "Okay," Izuku called out, turning to the barn and walking over to it. As soon as he reached the barn, Izuku saw Herschel deep within it clearing up some of the hay. He had apparently been trying to make it more livable since he was not really expecting a whole lot of people in a simple week. And from what it now looks like, it seems to be much more sleep-safe for those sleeping inside of it. Walking into the barn, Izuku stopped nearby as the elderly man continued to collect hay on his pitchfork. He glanced over at Izuku, seeing the boy was acting very suspiciously towards the whole area. "Well, I guess you came here for some reason?" Herschel asked. "Sean told me to tell you that the fence is almost done," Izuku said, as Herschel smiled. "That boy was always the survival prep artist. Thank you for informing me about it. How much is left?" Herschel asked. "Just a small part behind the farmhouse, he wanted to get it finished before the day ended," Izuku said, as Herschel nodded. "That's a good idea, better have it prepared and fully built up to last than having a picket fence," Herschel said, rubbing Izuku's hair. They both stayed quiet for a bit as Herschel had continued his work of clearing the barn of most of the hay on the ground. Izuku picked up a pitchfork himself, whilst nearly falling backwards due to its lanky size, and he assisted the elderly man. Herschel gave him a look of acknowledgement as Izuku assisted him with cleaning up the barn. They were just about finished with it when Lee had arrived to inform Herschel about what he'd talked to Sean about. But suddenly Herschel's eyes turned into a somewhat glare as he looked at Lee with some kind of prejudice. "Hey Herschel, your son sent me here to tell you that he's nearly finished with the fence. It'll be built within the hour," Lee said, smiling at Herschel. "Is that so? Well, far be it from me to curse him out for preparations. What was your name again?" Herschel asked. "It's Lee," Lee replied. "Well, that's all well and good, what are your plans for when you leave the farm eventually?" Herschel questioned. "My best guess was heading over to Savannah. Clementina's parents were last heard being there," Lee said, as Herschel nodded. "Well, I hope that if you find them that they're fine and not part of this undead legion you and Sean have been talking about," Herschel said, before standing up stretching. "I will make sure that we find her parents, but I'm not too sure about if they're still alive anymore," Lee said, as Herschel gave him an odd look. "Well, make sure to train the girl how to defend herself at some point. Can't have children die during these times, it makes us feel less human if they die off too early," Herschel said, turning back to his work. Is there something you don't like about Lee, Herschel?" Izuku asked, finally getting the time to ask. "I saw his name earlier this week on the Atlanta news. This man has killed a state senator, not that I care for that man specifically. But you'd best keep your eye on him, boy," Herschel said, whilst Lee and Izuku went to leave the barn, but just as they were leaving the barn to check up on everyone else, a loud scream of agony was heard from the area Lee had left Sean. "Awawa. Quick. Get to the area and see what happened. I'll get my gun," Herschel called out from the barn. Izuku and Lee ran towards where the commotion was happening and were brought to a very disheartening sight. Duck was on the tractor as he was being pulled on by a walker that had somehow snuck up on the farm. But the odd thing, however, was the fact that the tractor was on and on top of Sean's left leg as he struggled to escape from his small stuck situation. Izuku rushed over and pulled Duck from the walker and kicked it in the face, knocking the man-eating monster to the ground. Placing Duck on the ground, the boy rushed to his father and pointed at the fence, to which the man rushed over to assist. Hopping onto the tractor, Izuku went to focus on manning the vehicle as he realized something very harrowing. He'd never learned how to drive back in his world, so he was running on autopilot from the movies he'd seen in his world. He found the clutch as he pulled it back, releasing the brake, and immediately placed the tractor in reverse. Sean screamed in even more agony as the tractor had rolled back over his leg. Lee had managed to get near Sean and pulled him away from the tractor with Kenny as they brought the boy over to a tree to rest. Turning off the tractor, Izuku pulled out a knife he'd kept on hand from the small suburbs and rushed over to the fence. The walkers were leaning on the barricade as they struggled to get past it. Moving his blade into the first walker's head, it slumped before the second walker grabbed onto Izuku's wrist. Gaor. The walker growled at him angrily. Gee, get off of me. Izuku struggled as he yanked the knife from the first walker's face. Grower. Another walker from the field called out, alerting Izuku to that more walkers were coming. See, come on. Get off. Izuku said, stabbing the walker holding his wrist on the wrist of it. As he continued to struggle with the walker on his arm, Lee had come over and punched it in the face, sending it backwards. Izuku yelped when the walker's arm had pulled him into the fence as well, and he gave Lee the knife as he reached over and stabbed the walker in the head. Bang! Looking behind themselves, they found Herschel holding a rifle in his hands as he shot the incoming walkers. As they pulled themselves back over the fencing, Izuku fell back onto his butt as he panted heavily. That was his first brush with death as he looked at his now bruising wrist with a slight fear and anger at himself. He couldn't get far into his own self-loathing as they heard another scream of agony from Sean and looked over at the young man. Whilst they were busy with the walkers near the broken fencing, another fence was broken down as they had started to eat him alive. For the rest of his life, Izuku would forever remember the look on Sean's face as the walkers stuck their hands into his stomach and pulled out his entrails. Large intestines were pulled out and feasted on by the walkers as the other two were biting into the young man's neck and leg. Herschel rushed over to his son and shot the trio of walkers before pulling them away from the boy. And for some odd reason the young man was still breathing as he looked at Herschel as he smiled at him. I'll be alright, Peepa, Lee, Izuku and Kenny helped me. Sean said, as Herschel knelt near his son. Don't worry, Sean, we'll get some bandages and cover this up. You'll be good. Herschel said, tears falling from his eyes. Mr. Green? Izuku asked, slightly worried. Herschel, we're so sorry about what happened to Sean. Lee said, trying to apologize. Grr. Get the F out of here. I can't stand to look at you all, without even thinking about my son. Get out, and never come back. Herschel growled at them as Kenny looked at Lee, Izuku and Clementine. You got that ride to Macon if you want. He said, walking away to his truck. Leaving the farm, Izuku watched as multiple other walkers made their way towards it. There weren't nearly enough to overwhelm the elderly man, but he was worried that in his sorrow he'd cause even more of a ruckus. Shaking his head, he kept his eyes out on the road as Kenny drove them further away from the suburbs that belonged to Clementina's home. The little girl, however, was looking worse for wear as she hugged her legs to her chest, her face showing definite signs of trauma. Looking over the changing scenery, Izuku kept getting flashes of Sean's lifeless face looking at him. His intestines laying on the ground nearby his corpse as he stared at Izuku with a completely dead gaze. Then the man stood up to full height as he growled at him as though he were a walker. Shaking his head, Izuku looked at the surroundings as they heard the truck pitter to a stop as Kenny looked ahead of them. Well, I guess this is as far as we're going, he said, as everyone got out of the truck. Moving quietly throughout the area, Izuku kept an eye out for potential exits for them to use should they get separated. But Kenny noticed movement behind one of the vehicles, believing it to be someone who was a survivor like them. Hey! We've ran out of gas, you know where we can get some more? Kenny called out, before the person came out. Gagor. The now identified walker growled loudly. Holy F, Kenny called, as Izuku and Lee gained a protective stance over Clementine and Duck. The walkers surrounded the small group as Izuku kicked a walker's knee, causing it to fall down to the ground as he smashed its head with his foot. Lee had seen this and done the same with another walker as he kept Clementine close, unfortunately Duck had left the safety of their numbers and a walker had leaped onto him. Rushing over, Izuku kicked the walker in the side, taking its attention from the screaming boy. Moving backwards, Izuku found a small brick and prepared to hit it in the head with it, but that was all before a gunshot rang out. Bang! 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 Run! A young man with a small mustache and wearing a trucker hat called out. Get inside the drugstore. A dark-skinned woman said, as everyone rushed to it. They entered the store as they let out sighs of relief. But that all stopped when a man walked over to them with a furious expression on his face as he glared at them all. What the F were you thinking? He yelled at them all. A new day P3, we can't take risks like this. A feminine voice called out. And we can't just let people die, either. The woman who helped save them all replied. When I say, that door stays shut no matter what, I mean it. We don't know who these people are, they could be dangerous. The second woman said, glaring at the small group's savior. Worse, they could have led them right to us. An elderly man said, looking over to the first woman. Where the hell is your humanity? The woman who saved them questioned. We have kids with us. Lee said, as Izuku looked around the place. I see one little girl as well as a green-haired teenager. The elderly man said, as Izuku moved over next to Katja and Duck. Is he going to be, okay? Izuku asked, as Katja nodded. I just need to clean him up, then we can figure out how to get out of here. Katja said, as she began to clean Duck. Lee, Clementine called up to Lee. What is it? Lee asked, a little tense. I need to pee. Clem said, as she looked embarrassed. In a minute Clem, we're in a very bad situation. Lee said, as he focused back on the conversation at hand. Izuku walked over near Lee and Clementine as he pulled the girl away from the conversation that was dreadfully coming close to a fight. He pulled her over to the counter where he'd found a small key and led the young girl over to the bathroom nearby. He had no idea what was going on, but he wanted no part in it since he was looking after Clementine at the moment whilst Lee talked to the adults. They've got kids, Lily. The hat-wearing young man said, urgently. Those things outside don't care. Lily, the woman who angrily didn't want everyone inside the building, glared back. Maybe you should go join them then, you'll have something in common. Kenny stated with an angry glare. God damn it, Lily, you have to control these people. The elderly man said, as Lee spoke to Kenny. She's in, but that's for sure. He muttered. If that's what it takes. Lily said, now glaring at Lee. Well, you don't have to be a beach about it. Lee retorted. Holy SHT, son of a beach. One of them spittin'. The elderly man said, as Lee angrily looked at him. He wasn't bitten. Lee angrily spoke. The hell he wasn't. We have to end this now. The elderly man said, turning to walk over to the small family. Over my dead body. Kenny said, glaring at the man. We'll dig one hole. The elderly man said. No. I'm cleaning up his body, there's no bite. He's fine. Katja called out. Don't you people get it? We've already seen this happen. We let someone with a bite stay and we all end up bitten. The elderly man said, somewhat insanely. Shut up. Kenny growled. We have to throw him out or smash his head in. The elderly man said. Kenny, stop him. Katja said, becoming fearful. Lee, what do we do about this guy? Kenny asked, looking for guidance. We kick his butt. Lee retorted as Kenny remembered Lee's loyalty. That's what I was thinking. Kenny growled out. Everybody just chill the F out. The woman from before called out. Nobody is doing anything. Lily said, as she stared at the other woman. Shut up, Lily. And you, shut the F up. They are going to find us, and they are going to get in here, and none of this will matter. Because we're about to be trapped in here with one of those things. The elderly man growled out. What the hell you talking about? Kenny questioned. He's bitten. That's how you turn. The elderly man growled out. He's not bitten. Lee, stop this. It's upsetting him. Katja called out. Oh. I'm upsetting him is getting eaten alive. The elderly man growled. Sit down. Or else. Lee warned. You're gonna whoop me. You and what HMO parade? The elderly man called out, glaring at Lee. This one right here. Kenny said, as the elderly man retorted. Hee hee, that's good. Little boy, before you eat your mommy, you're going to see your dad get his nose broken. The elderly man called out. On the other side of the room, Izuku and Clementine noticed that there was someone inside the bathroom already. Both were looking confused, but as Izuku rose his hand to knock on the door, it was smacked on by whatever was inside. I'm gonna kill him, cat. Just worry about Duck. Kenny stated to his wife. Lee, there's someone in there. Clementine said, as Lee looked over. She's right, Lee. Someone's in the bathroom. Izuku said, gaining everyone's attention. It's just locked, keys behind the counter probably. Lee said, as Izuku held out the key in his hand. Hey, I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just looking out for my daughter. The man said, as he looked slightly calmer. No, you're just a guy who is arguing over killing a kid. Kenny retorted. He's covered in muck. Watch, she'll find the bite. Watch. The elderly man growled out. She won't. Kenny promised. And when she does? First thing he'll do is sink his teeth into his mom's face, then when she's dead, he'll probably pounce on your little girl. She'll turn fast, then there'll be 3. And that, boy, is the ballgame. The elderly man said. He's a little boy, I think we can handle it. Lee said, as the elderly man looked at him surprised. A little boy. He'll be an uncontrollable man-eater. The elderly man growled out in surprise. It's not gonna happen. Kenny said, angrily. It is, and we're tossing him out now. The elderly man called out. Knock this guy out, Kenny. Lee said, as Kenny spoke. With pleasure. As Kenny punched the elderly man in the face, he took a punch to the face without being moved from his spot before punching Kenny in retaliation. As Kenny was knocked out to the ground, Clementine and Izuku let out a scream of fear as they had unlocked the door during the conversation. Aewa. Clementine screamed. Clementine, get away. Izuku called out, as the walker tackled him to the ground. Clementine. Izuku. Lee called out, rushing to their aid. Gee, get off. Get off. Get off. Izuku grunted out as he pulled a knife from his pocket as the walker grabbed his arms. Gua. Huia. The walker growled out. Jesus. The elderly man called out. Lee rushed through the people that were in his way, before he fell to the ground after tripping over one of the items on the ground. Getting back up immediately, he rushed over to find Izuku struggling to hold back the walker from the ground as the walker's face kept getting closer and closer to the boy's face. Someone help me. Izuku screamed in fear as the walker forced the knife from his hand and across the floor to Lee. Get away from them, you son of a bitch. Lee called out, grabbing the walker from Izuku's form. Pulling out the knife, he stabbed it into the head of the walker, causing it to go limp in his arms before he pushed it to the ground. Izuku, however, was with Clementine as he had shuffled over to the wall of the room, his heart beating like crazy. Lee moved over to the two of them as he watched Clementine hug him, which he reciprocated as they both shivered in both fear and the adrenaline coursing through their bodies. Man, Lee said, bending over slightly. You, okay? The female from earlier asked, as her gun was pointed at the walker, no shot having been taken. Just great, thanks. Lee said, as sounds of walkers smacking the windows and doors were heard. After that little quiet attack from the walkers, everyone let out a brief breath of relief as they heard the walkers hear sounds from outside draw the attention of the walkers away. Sitting down in the corner, Izuku had been holding his legs up to his chest as he felt as though he had come very close to losing his life. Clementine was sitting next to him as she had come back after using the restroom in order to relieve herself. But their conversation from before wasn't over as the elderly man growled out at everyone who was in there. We almost died because nobody thought to check the bathroom. That was stupid. That was, awk. The elderly man groaned in pain as he placed a hand over his chest. Dad. Lily called out, kneeling next to her father. Was he the one that was bitten? Lee asked. No. Don't be crazy. It's his heart. Lily said, as the elderly man spoke up. "MI pills," he painfully said. Nitroglycerin pills?" Katja asked, worriedly. "Yes, we're out. We've been trying to get into the pharmacy since we got here. Please try to get in there, behind the counter where the pills are." Lily begged. "It's probably through the office." Lee said, a little saddened. "I'll look after my dad," Lily said, as she sat down next to him. "Everybody should get comfy and gather anything useful. We could be here a while." Kenny said, as the other guy spoke up. "I'm starting to feel like this drugstore might not be a permanent solution." The guy said, as Kenny spoke. "You're right, this isn't exactly Fort Knox." Kenny replied. "What do you suggest?" Lee asked. "We need as much gas as possible, so we can all get out of downtown Macon. Fast." The young man said, as Lee retorted. "Agreed." Lee said. "Then I'll head out and get gas. There's a motel not too far from here. Out towards the end of Peachtree. I'll work my way towards it and come back siphoning what I can." The guy said, as everyone nodded. "You know your way around town?" Lee asked. "Born and raised." The young man said. "If you're gonna do that, here's a walkie-talkie in case you get in a tight spot. Hopefully you won't need it." Lee said, as the young man nodded. "Cool. Clementina's got the other one, check in with her and see if you can get back here as soon as you can." Lee said, as the young man nodded. "And you, what's your name?" Kenny asked, looking at Lily. "It's Lily, my dad's Larry," she said, as the woman who saved them spoke up. "Keep a good eye on him, these boys will get him his medicine." Kenny said, as Lee spoke up. "That's right. And you keep an eye on that front door, you're our lookout." Kenny said. "It's Doug, you got it," the young chubby man said. "And I'm Carly," the woman who saved them said. "All right, Carly, you'll shift in with Doug when he needs it. For now, get some rest, you're a good shot and I'd like to keep it that way," Kenny said, as everyone nodded at their jobs. "You got it, boss," Carly said, as Lily glared at them for calling Kenny boss. "Now get him those pills," Kenny said, sternly. As everyone went about their own little missions, Izuku stayed on the ground as he thought about what had happened earlier. He was completely helpless against that singular walker, and he had known that something or someone was inside of the bathroom. He needed to be more aware of the places he'd went through, otherwise he'd just be a burden on others. Taking a deep breath, he walked over to Kenny, gaining the courage to ask him a question. Kenny, is there something that I can do?" Izuku asked, as the man looked down to him. "Well, I guess you can keep both Clementine and Duck company. Make sure to keep them distracted from everything that's going on, and most importantly make sure that they can still act like kids. Lord knows that we can't leave them feeling like they need to grow up fast," Kenny said, ruffling Izuku's hair. "Oh, okay, sir. Izuku said, as Kenny spoke to him. How do you get your hair to be so soft, by the way, kid? Last time I checked, we don't have any kind of shampoo or conditioner that can do that. Kenny asked, as Izuku let out a cheeky smile. T-Trade's secret. Izuku said, walking away. That brat. Kenny said, chuckling. A new day P, for whilst everyone was preparing themselves for getting Larry his nitroglycerin tablets, Izuku was looking slightly fearful when the word had come up. He had a very bad experience with nitroglycerin in the past, and that was not something he needed to think about right now. But to hear that it could help the man with his heart issues, he stayed within the shop as he kept an eye outside. He was staying next to Doug as the man was keeping watch on the walkers who strayed near the drugstore. As the two were keeping watch, Izuku noticed that Carly had walked into the back room with Lee as she had a hard-to-read expression on her face. Shaking his head at what was going to happen between the two, Izuku kept his hand on Clementine's radio for her as he kept an ear out for Glenn. He would stay like this for about an hour before he would hear some scratching from the radio itself before he answered it. He wasn't sure if Glenn needed some assistance at this moment, but he wanted to be sure that this really was him and not someone who killed him and is trying to find the rest of them. Hey, little girl. Are you there? Glenn's voice came out. Hey, is this Glenn? Izuku asked. Hey kid, I'm not sure who you are. But can you get the radio to Clementine's dad? I need to get his assistance on something. Glenn said, as Izuku gave a gruff grunt. Okay, are you stuck or something? Izuku asked, as Glenn replied back to him. Yeah, I'm inside of a small freezer because whilst I was looking for some gas at a local inn, some geeks came up on me. I was forced to hide in order to stay out of their sight. But I was trying to help a girl who was stuck inside one of the rooms. Glenn said, as Izuku rushed over to Lee. Entering through the doorway into the backroom area, Izuku found Carly leaving the room as he delivered the radio to Lee. The man looked down at him as he bore a confused expression on his face before Izuku pointed to the radio itself as he answered. Pulling Clementine into the store with himself, Izuku made sure to keep her distracted for a while before Lee came back into the store. He was looking around before calling Carly over to himself before looking directly at him as he walked towards him as well, greatly confusing him. Is there something you need? Izuku asked, confused. I want to know if you'd like to come with me. Lee said, as Izuku looked away. I don't know, I wasn't much help against T the Walker earlier. Izuku said, rubbing his left arm. Don't worry, your assistance might prove useful on this mission. We're going to get Glenn back from the inn he's stuck at. Someone of your height might be useful for getting into small spaces. Lee said, as Clementine pouted. Why can't I go? She asked. Because there are too many walkers present for you to go. With Izuku, I know that he's proficient in killing walkers. Sorry Clementine, I will take you with me the next time I need to go somewhere. Lee said, as Clementine nodded. Am I going to have something to defend myself with? Izuku asked, as Carly pulled out a knife. I never leave an area without a knife of my own. You can use this, just make sure to hit them in the head. Carly said, as Izuku nodded. Leaving the building, and walking down the road as silently as possible, the small trio had left the drugstore in search of their ally. Reaching the inn in about 15 minutes, they found a large number of walkers patrolling the place as they growled to themselves quietly. Izuku took notice of a freezer nearby as he saw a walker stand up, as both Lee and Carly ducked with him underneath the wall. They heard it growl before it walked away from their location and towards a large RV in the middle of the parking lot. A bumping sound was heard from the freezer causing Carly to point her gun at it. Izuku pulled her weapon down before they saw that it was Glenn who came out of his hiding spot with a smile before taking notice of Izuku's presence. Stepping out of the freezer, he jumped over the wall and ducked underneath it as he whispered to Lee and Carly. When I asked for some help, I didn't think you'd bring a middle school student. He shouted. I need to make sure he has the experience to fight walkers on his own, he's old enough to learn how to defend himself. Lee retorted in a whisper. Lee's right, he needs to know how to defend himself. Carly said, as Glenn nodded. Just wanted to know why the kid is here. He muttered. I was asked to assist. Izuku stated as Glenn nodded. Okay, so I managed to collect the gas required to give everyone enough to come down here later. But I heard someone seemingly calling for help in that room up there. Glenn said, pointing at the barricaded doorway. Oh no, I am not going to help someone else right now. We got the gas we need, so now we can go. Carly said, as Glenn shook his head. Would you really let someone die to these things? We can't leave her all alone without knowing someone is out here to help. Glenn said, as Carly shook her head. DMN right, we can't leave her behind. Lee muttered. Lee, I think this M might be getting us a little over our head. Izuku warned. Don't worry, if things go wrong, you can run back to the drugstore. Lee said, patting Izuku's head. Fine. Let's go save Glenn's damsel in distress. Carly growled out. After having their whisper argument, the group had moved over to a truck's window before using a random spark plug in order to break the window quietly. Once reaching inside, they pulled out a small ice pick and Lee added that to his repertoire of weapons. Moving from the truck over to a small vehicle that was being held up by a stopper, they killed the walker that was eating a dead body on the ground. Once he was done in, they reached inside and put the vehicle on neutral before pulling the stopper out of the way. The vehicle rolled down the parking lot before smashing right into a random walker and pinning it to a wall next to a fire axe. Lee and the others moved over to another small vehicle that had a walker standing around doing seemingly nothing. Killing it very quickly, they moved on to the RV before finding a walker behind it just looking at the vehicle distantly. Calling the walker over, Lee handed his weapon over to Izuku as he allowed the boy to call this one since he killed the first two. As the walker got closer and closer to him, Izuku felt his adrenaline pumping through his veins as it rounded the corner growling loudly. Kicking its leg out from under it, Izuku watched as it fell onto its back before Izuku slammed the ice pick into its head. Pulling the weapon out of the walker's head, he looked over at Lee, Carly and Glenn as the trio smirked at him. Moving on to the walker stuck behind the vehicle, they managed to kill it although at the loss of the ice pick. Izuku had stood onto the tire of the vehicle and stabbed the walker in the head causing it to fall down and pushing the weapon further into its head, the pointed end coming out the back of its head. Lee and Glenn made a joke about the walker's body and the ice pick before they geeked out about a new weapon to use. All that was left was the two walkers banging on the door of the room where the woman could now be heard asking for the walkers to go away. Lee took charge on this one, as he rushed the two walkers and took them down without much fanfare. With a horizontal swing the first walker's head was taken from its body before Lee slammed his axe sideways taking the other walker's head and getting the axe stuck a bit. Pulling it out of the wall, he moved up to the barricaded door and sliced through the wood easily. He knocked on the door, speaking to the woman in hopes that she'd just open the door so that they could get her to safety. Hello. Are you okay in there? Lee asked, knocking softly. Just go away. Bitten, I already know what happens when you're bit. The woman inside screams. Well, she doesn't want to be saved, so let's go. Carly said, as Izuku looked at her. She could be in trouble, and fearful to ask for it. Izuku said, for once not stuttering. Ma'am, if you don't open the door, we will need to break it down. Lee called out with a warning. Just go away. Leave me alone. The woman yelled. I'm breaking down the door then. Lee called out, kicking it. He was about to raise the axe to break it down when the woman could be heard from inside giving up. He lowered the weapon before they all heard the sounds of the door's locks coming undone as she eventually walked out. Izuku, however, he gained a very solemn expression on his face as he noticed something that Glenn and Lee didn't before it was too late. Her skin was pale in color as she stared at the group. I tried to warn you. But you wouldn't listen. I was already bitten. The woman said, pointing to her wound. And maybe we could find a cure. Izuku asked, as the woman looked at him. Kid, I've already seen what it does to people. I've seen it happen to my boyfriend. She replied. You have a boyfriend? Glenn asked, dejectedly, but was ignored. Glenn. Carly growled at him, smacking his head. We could find a way to keep you alive. Lee said, as the woman shook her head. I don't want to become one of them. They bite you, then you die, and you come back, before you look for anything you can find. The woman said, insanity entering her iris. Ma'am, we could still help you. Lee urged as the woman took notice of Carly's gun. You have a gun. She said, as Carly became guarded. Yeah, what about it? She questioned cautiously. See, can I borrow it? She asked. What? No. Carly said, as the woman shrieked. Please. I really don't want to become one of them. They are satanic. The woman pleaded and muttered the last part. Give her the gun. Lee said, his eyes covered in shadows. What? I can't do that, Lee. Carly said, as Lee glared at her. Just do it. Lee growled. Fine, but I'm not cleaning up the mess. Carly said, handing over her weapon. Thank you for this. You are very kind, I can finally be with my boyfriend. She said, as Lee spoke to her. Just make sure that it's quick. He said, as the woman nodded. Izuku walked down the stairs of the inn, meeting up with Carly and Glenn. The two were looking grim as they thought about the interaction between them and the woman who was bitten. Shaking their heads, they heard movement from the stairs as Lee returned with Carly's gun in hand. Shaking his head, the small group had heard walkers incoming before rushing over to Glenn's vehicle and taking off back to the drugstore. Within minutes they had returned back to the drugstore as they went back to their original jobs as Lee continued with his plans of getting Larry his medicine. He leaves the building once again, but this time through the front door with Doug as they stand in the small area between the street and the store. Izuku kept an eye on the two from inside the building as he opens the door and stands out there with Doug. He finds another brick in case they need to get another distraction for Lee as they watch as Lee breaks the window where Doug had turned on the televisions from the store across the street. Once the televisions are heard by the dead, they all walked over to it, becoming distracted by the sound, allowing Lee to walk over to a walker stuck under a telephone pole. Izuku watched as the man seemingly held a small conversation with the walker before he rose his axe in the air. He let out small wails of sadness as he landed multiple blows on the walker, almost as though he knew the walker before this whole mess happened and they were human. Izuku kept an eye on the walkers as they slowly heard him wailing out in sadness and turned around. Pulling out another item to use to distract the walkers, Izuku made sure to have Doug stay quiet before throwing the item across the street, hitting a car far away from Lee's position. The car alarm went off as the walkers came out from their distraction from Lee and moved towards the vehicle itself. Lee killed a couple walkers who got too close to him that didn't get distracted by the sound before arriving at the drugstore doors. The trio entered the building as they all let out breaths of fresh air before heading over to the pharmacy. Lee called out to Lily as the woman had smiled at him as soon as he showed her the key to the pharmacy he'd gotten from the walker on the street. Great. Let's get in there and collect the pills. Lily said, as she led Lee into the back room. Izuku watched from outside of the pharmacy as the two opened the door and entered the room, only for the sound of an alarm going off. As Lee cursed, Lily informed him to gather everything he could and search for the nitroglycerin tablets for her father. A small distance away from the drugstore, a walker with a screwdriver in its left shoulder got up from the ground. It growled softly as it heard the alarm of the store going off in the distance. As it turned around a corner of a small alleyway it was laying down in, we see a very large horde of walkers banging at the metal fence and windows of the drugstore as the alarm got even louder. The growling of the walkers outside of the building got worse as we see hundreds of walkers moving towards the building as the new walker was moving towards it as well. Inside the building everyone is moving fast, as they tried to find anything to barricade the front entrance as much as possible to buy everyone time to escape. Kenny was running around giving orders as he told everyone what they were supposed to do until it was time to go. Duck, Come on baby, time to go. Katja said, helping Duck around to leave. I'm gonna get the truck pulled up round back. Kenny called out, as Lily spoke up. Do it fast, I've got to get my dad out of here. Lily said, urgently. I don't plan on dilly-dallying. Kenny retorted as Lily left. Honey, take Duck into the office and barricade the living hell out of the door behind me. Glenn, when you hear me honking in the alley, start getting people out of here. Kenny told everyone. You got it. Glenn said, as he moved into position. Doug, Carly and Lee, you guys make sure our defenses stay up till then. And Lee, I better get that axe, in case I run into any of them on the way to my truck. Kenny ordered. Here you go. Lee said, tossing the axe to him. Izuku, you stay with Lee and make sure nothing gets past him, I'm depending on you to make sure nobody gets bit whilst we're leaving. Kenny said, as Izuku nodded. Yes sir. Izuku called out, moving Clementine to the office. Guys, that door's not locked anymore. Doug called out, looking at the doorway after hearing a screeching sound. SHT. You three get on it. I'll get back as fast as I can. Kenny called out as he walked away. Stay away from the windows. Lee told Clementine and Izuku. The man rushed over to the door where Carly and Doug were barely holding back the horde who were bearing down on them with Glenn holding the door as well. But that was when Katja had called out for Glenn's assistance in the back. Glenn, we need your help. Please hurry. Katja called out. Lee arrived at the door, and made an arm motion to allow Glenn to rush over to Katja in the office who was holding back her own set of walkers from getting in. Lee pushed the door back closed as they felt and heard the walkers growling whilst pushing in on the doors behind them. The force of each push causing the doors to open slightly before they were pushed back closed again. But this was when Doug decided to speak to everyone at the door as Izuku searched for something to hold back the door. Hey, Lee, if we don't make it out of this you should know that I think you're a great guy. Doug said, as Lee grunted out an answer. We will make it through this. Lee said, as he struggled to hold the door shut. Doug, if we don't make it through this, you should know, Carly spoke before the door rudely interrupted her words. Pushing the doors back with all the strength he could muster with adrenaline coursing through his veins, Lee managed to hold it back. But that was when Doug began asking Carly questions about what she was going to talk about. I should know what? Doug asked, with a confused expression on his face. Huh? Carly asked, looking behind the two men. You said I should know, Doug said, before the sounds of glass breaking behind him was heard. Gwa. A walker called out, knocking a small vending machine down as it broke through the glass. SHT, Carly called out, leaving the two of them to hold the door as she shot at the walkers. On it. She said, pulling out her gun. Are you sure? Lee asked, as Carly let out a small leaping sound. Oh, SHT, she called out, shooting the walkers. Bang. Bang. Wah. Oh SHT okay then, Lee muttered as Lee found Izuku. Izuku. Can you look for something to stick in between the handles? Something real strong. Lee questioned. Yeah, I think I remember seeing something in the office. Izuku called out to him and rushing away. The walkers managed to push the front door out of the way a bit, causing Lee to push it back down with Doug on his left. They continued this game of keep and take until glass was heard breaking from Lee's right as Doug left him in order to take care of that issue. Izuku. Did you find anything? Lee called out. I'm sure it was in here somewhere. Oh, there it is. Izuku's voice was heard. That window is screwed. Doug called out as Lee allowed him to move away. Go. He said, before the door was pushed wider by the walkers. Struggling even more now as he was the only one holding the doors shut, with some great effort Lee manages to get the door closed when Izuku arrived. He had the cane to Lee's father that he'd told Clementine about, and Lee in that moment couldn't help but see the irony in what Izuku had found. Pushing the cane through the door's handles, and moving away, the two watched as the doors were pushed on as the cane held its ground. Nodding at their display of ingeniousness, they heard screams from their left and right and were brought to a stop in their eyes as time slowed down to a crawl. On one end of the shop, a walker had Carly's ankle with one hand as she struggled to reach out for her purse which held more mags for her gun, another walker incoming. But on the other end of the store where Lee saw the window breaking, was Doug as he was barely holding himself inside the store. Multiple hands of walkers had pulled through and grabbed onto him as he barely kept himself from being pulled into the streets. Their hearts beat in slow motion as Lee watched Izuku rush over to Carly, allowing him to head after Doug. As Izuku grabbed a mag from Carly's purse and tossed it at her, she caught it and reloaded her magazine and shot the two walkers. With Lee, he had managed to pull Doug away from the walkers and the four of them rushed over to the office just as Kenny had arrived. "Let's go," Kenny called out. As everyone ran through the doorway, all that was left was Clementine, Izuku and Lee as they rushed over to the door. A walker had appeared out of nowhere as they grabbed Clementina's ankle, causing the girl to fall to the ground. Running as fast as he could, Izuku rushed over and kicked the walker's head as hard as he could before stabbing it in the head with the knife he'd gotten from Carly. Once the walker was dead, the trio ran towards the doorway as Izuku saw Larry walking back to it with a furious expression on his face. Just as Lee was about to enter the office, he saw Larry standing there holding the door open and knew he was going to try something. "You're not coming with us, you son of a bitch," Larry growled out before punching the man. "Lee!" Izuku screamed, gaining Kenny's attention. Larry walked out of the doorway and towards the vehicles as Izuku ran towards Lee. Helping the man up, they both stumbled out of the drugstore as Izuku closed the door behind them both. Kenny assisted Izuku in getting Lee into the back of his truck before saying one last thing to the two of them. "I'm not letting somebody else get eaten today. Especially a good friend," Kenny said, as he pushed Lee into the back of his truck with Izuku jumping into the back seat as Clementine hugged Lee. It was an hour later after the drugstore was invaded by the walkers. Everyone was clearing out the inn from the walkers who were laying about as well as the new ones that they'd all killed. Moving the garbage bins over to the entrances of the motor inn, they had the slopes of the bins pointed inward so that it'd be easy to get in and out of the place. Lee walked around the place talking to people as Izuku sat next to Clementine and Duck as the boy was telling Clem about a comic he'd read one time. Izuku was smiling at the boy as he patted the boy's shoulder, allowing Lee to speak to the two of them without the boy interrupting. Izuku did notice that whilst Lee was walking over to the two of them, that Larry was openly glaring at the man with seemingly hatred in his eyes. Shaking his head at the elderly man's antics, Izuku focused his attention at the man who was protecting Clementine and him somewhat. "Hey Duck, you wanna cool it for a minute?" Lee asked, as Duck apologized. "Okay, sorry," he said, reasonably. "I'm sorry, there's not a lot of kids here," Lee said, as Izuku shook his head. "No, it's not that. I got grabbed again," Clementine said, a little sad. "I was there though," Lee said, trying to console her. "I fell and my walkie-talkie broke. Glenn had the other one," Clementine said, as Izuku felt really bad for her. "Ah. I'm sorry," Lee said, apologizing. "Thanks. I know I need to be tough, I'm just sad," Clementine said, looking down. "I know it doesn't make any sense, but it's how I used to talk to my mom and dad, and now they're gone, it's gone," Clementine said, tears falling from her eyes. "Maybe we can find you another one?" Lee asked, trying to lift her spirits. "I'll just keep this one, I guess," Clem said, settling on the one with more sentimental value. "Don't worry Clementine, I'm sure that we can fix it," Izuku said, as Clem smiled at him sadly. "Lee, come here for a second," Larry's voice called out. "Let me go deal with this," Lee said, as Izuku followed after him. As Clementine nodded at the two of them, Duck came back and started to talk about his comic books again. Izuku chuckled a little bit when hearing the boy rattle on and on about his little comics. It reminded Izuku about the life he used to live back in his world. The world that was filled with superpowers, not only that but how he had his last conversation with All Might in his world. Shaking his head as a stray tear fell from his eye, he focused his thoughts on what Larry was going to tell Lee. His opinion of Larry had definitely changed ever since he tried to get Lee killed back at the drugstore, so his emotions were locked tight when he stopped next to Lee. "What do you want?" Lee questioned, a glare on his face pointed at Larry. "You like my daughter?" he questioned, and Izuku looked downright confused. "Her dad tried to kill me, so," Lee said, looking back at the man. "Well, he did that because he knows that Lee Everett is a convicted murderer, and so, will everyone else if you go near her. You hear me?" Larry said, threatening Lee. "I know who you are, and I don't give a SHT about what happens to you," Larry said, poking Lee in the chest before continuing. "But if anything happens to my daughter, or that little girl you've got with you, you watch your butt," Larry said, as Izuku spoke up. "Well then it'd be better that we tell everyone that you tried to kill him back at the drugstore then," Izuku asked, causing Larry to glare down at him. "What are you going to do? Nobody's going to believe you," Larry said, as Izuku spoke up again. "I may not be someone who is really well known within this group, but at least Lee managed to save your people. Not only that, but when we were in the drugstore, we prevented Carly and Doug from being killed." "Where in the hell were you?" Izuku questioned, glaring back at the man. "You think that you can tell me, little brat?" Larry growled. "Careful, Larry, make sure that you keep your activity low. Don't want you to have another heart attack, don't we?" Izuku threatened, walking away with Lee behind him. As Izuku left Lee alone, Lily called Lee over to herself as the two walked out to the street. Izuku kept a very close eye on him and Lily as he watched Larry glare over at the colored man with a deep-seated hatred in his eyes. As the two talked, Kenny walked over to them before speaking to them as well, and from what it seemed like Lily made an optimistic statement. Before all the lights in the area began to turn off down the road. It continued further on until it reached the motor inn as the sign had suddenly turned off, taking away all signs of light from the building. Izuku suddenly became wary as soon as the lights turned off, because walkers could now sneak up on them without the light on. Because of this, everyone immediately set up the base and turned in for the night in one of the inn's rooms. Izuku had a room of his own because he didn't wish to be in the same room as everyone else, and he really wanted to have some time to think to himself. Izuku wakes up, he looks around his room as he lets out a yawn. Walking outside of the small room he was given by Lily, he enters the parking lot as he moves over to the little campfire that was made. He finds everyone looking at it with something akin to want, before he looks over at Lee and Kenny as they walk outside of the walls that surround them. He was bringing the new guy from a few weeks back as he entered the forest with them as they searched for game. It had been 2 whole months since they had moved into the motor inn, and Izuku was going on runs into Macon whilst Lee and Kenny left the place for collecting game. Kenny had been telling Lee about how they needed to leave before winter showed up. Izuku knew for a fact that the motor inn wouldn't last much longer than it had now. So he was gathering all the supplies he could so that they could last until they were going to be forced to leave. Lily, however, had been wanting to make the motor inn a small place where they could live, even though they didn't have anything to grow their own crops or have a small farm of their own. Shaking his head at the thought of leaving, he walked over to Lily's room as he wanted to see what she wanted him to gather this time. "So, where are you sending me today?" Izuku asked, as Lily stared at him. "I need you to go into Macon and gather some more blankets as well as food. We're running low now that Mark had given us all of his food and supplies," Lily said, as Izuku nodded. "I might not be able to gather everything again, the walkers are sticking around the city more so than last time," Izuku said, as Lily glared at him. "What are you afraid of being killed?" she asked, as Izuku just gave her an unimpressed expression. "Lily, it's only a matter of time before I make a mistake and get myself bitten." I'm done with you sending me out on these little suicide missions to gather supplies. I know that you're trying to thin out our small group. Izuku said, folding his arms on one another. What, you think that I am purposefully trying to get you killed? Lily accused. That's exactly what's happening, Lily. Every time I head out to Macon, I put myself on the line for each and every item that I come across. One of these days I won't come back. Izuku said, glaring at her. Lily just watched as Izuku left the room as he went into the parking lot where Katja and Clementine were listening to Duck. Moving over to the trio, he sat down on the couch as the bags under his eyes showed how much sleep he'd been getting. Katja looked over at him, noticing the bags under his eyes as she gave him a small checkup. You haven't been sleeping lately. What's wrong? Katja asked. It's Lily. She keeps sending me out on missions into Macon whilst Lee, Kenny and Mark are gone. I swear it's like she is trying to get me killed to save food for both her and her father. Izuku growled under his breath. She's just trying to look out for her father, dear. I know that she doesn't show a keen sign of care towards you, but you just need to adapt to how she acts around you. Katja said. I know that, but the problem I am having is that as she thinks that I'm going out there to collect supplies. All I've ever come back with were stupid things that she hides in her room. Izuku muttered. Don't worry about her, you told her that you're going to stop those runs, right? Katja asked. Yeah, as she wasn't happy about my talking back to her. Izuku said, letting out a sigh. Katja watched as Izuku's eyes fluttered a little bit before they closed for a millisecond. But moments later they opened back up as if he was forcing himself to stay awake as she just sighed. Just get some sleep. We'll inform you about whatever's happening. Katja said, as Izuku nodded. I hope you get better. Clementine's voice called out, as Izuku waved at her. It wasn't until around a few hours later that Izuku woke up again from his nap as he heard the sounds of talking outside his room. Opening the door, he found Lee was talking to Carly as they spoke about his past, and it seemed as though they were having a very thorough discussion. Walking out of his room, he sat down on the edge of the railing as Lee took notice of him. Hey kid, what's wrong? I heard that Katja told you to get some sleep. Lee asked. Lily's wanting me to collect some more blankets and supplies from Macon again. I told her that I'm stopping myself doing that, because the last time I went to Macon I was nearly bitten by a walker who got the jump on me. Izuku said, as Lee sighed. I swear I tell her every time that Macon is losing the safety it used to have. Me, Carly, Mark and Ben are going to see what this new guy told us about a farm. You want to come with? Lee asked. Farm? What are you talking about? Izuku asked, curious. These two new guys showed up not too long ago. We are planning on heading out to see what's up with the place they've got. Was wondering if you'd like to come with us. Lee said, as Izuku nodded. So long as it gets me away from Lily, then I am all game for that, Lee. Izuku said, moving into his room to get prepared. We'll be outside the walls if you can't find us. Lee said, as Izuku gave a grunt of acknowledgement from inside his room. Heading towards the walls, Izuku was stopped by Lily, who was glaring at him before she walked away. Shaking his head at how she was looking like she wanted to kill him for talking back to her, he exited the gates before he heard her mutter something under her breath. Good riddance. Now I don't need to deal with his back talk. Lily muttered as she walked away from the gate. You know, Lily, I can hear you. Izuku said, as the woman growled at him. It was meant to be heard by you. She growled. I don't know what you have against me being in the group, I've literally done nothing to you, Lily. Ever since we first got here, you've had it out for me and I'm sick and tired of it. Just leave me the hell alone and I won't get in your way. Izuku said, gaining Lee's attention. Hey, stop fighting. We need to go. Lee said, as Izuku nodded. Sorry Lee, I heard Lily talk about me in a not very nice way. Izuku said, as Lee sighed. Come on, we need to see if Danny and Andy are waiting for us," Lee said, as he led Izuku down the road. As it turned out, the two farm men were waiting for them as both Carly and Ben stared at the two in confusion. Once Lee told them both about what happened, Ben just sighed before walking to catch up with the farm men. Izuku kept himself near Lee and Carly since he didn't fully trust Ben, considering the young man was just brought into the group whilst he was sleeping. Danny and Andy were talking to Lee and Carly about their lives before the apocalypse as they spoke about how their mother would be expecting visitors. Izuku, however, kept an eye on their surroundings. He didn't want to be caught by a walker unawares. They were now walking down a path through the woods as the two farm men were talking about their past before the apocalypse. Apparently, they had been nominees for their farm being the best in the state of Georgia in the past, and they were really happy that their farm lasted as long as it did. As they defended it with electric fences as well as a generator that controlled the electricity itself. Izuku was impressed with their ingenuity with using a generator to power some fences with enough electricity to burn walkers to death. But he figured out one thing that they kept talking about: their generator relied heavily on gas in order to power it. If it ran out of gas or popped a bolt or belt, it wouldn't be capable of being used and the farm would be overrun. "So, this dairy, you guys really have food?" Mark asked, as the dairy men smiled. "Sure do, we lost most of the cattle, but we still have lots of milk, butter, and cheese stocked up," Andy said, as the group walked down the path further. "And with the vegetables we grow, we got plenty of food," Danny said, as Izuku followed Lee and Carly from the back. "It's nice to get away from that motel for a while. This Lily Kenny thing is starting to get ridiculous," Carly said, as Izuku spoke up. "You can say that again. I don't even know what I did to her to make her hate me so much. But she's been a real B-word to me lately. More so when I stopped going out on runs for her," Izuku said, as Carly stared at him. "So that's where you've been lately? God damn it. We already told her that we shouldn't be putting the younger people out on runs," Carly growled before looking at Lee. "Personally, I'd like it if you started to take charge more," Carly said, as Lee retorted. "You think they'd want me for a leader?" Lee asked, concerned. "Sure, everybody looks up to you," Carly said, smiling. "Well, not everyone thinks I'm so trustworthy," Lee said, looking serious. "This is about Larry, isn't it?" Izuku asked, as the man nodded. "Because of your past. Does anyone else know?" Carly asked. "Larry knows," Lee said, his voice even. "Great, that can't be easy," Carly said, as Izuku spoke up. "I may not know how he feels, but at least I can feel similarly since Lily looks at me like I killed her unborn child," Izuku uttered out as Carly giggled. "Clementine knows, but that was probably because you brought it up at the drugstore. She asked me about it, I couldn't lie to her." Lee spoke up again. "What exactly did happen with the senator?" Carly asked, curiously. "It was an accident. I mean, I pretty much already knew about the affair. Sometimes I wonder if I should talk to the group about it," Lee said, looking ahead. "You don't have to. Whatever happened before things went to hell, doesn't matter anymore," Carly said, as Lee retorted. "Not sure everyone would see it that way," Lee said, with a sad expression. "Maybe you're right. Listen, over the years I've reported on some pretty messed up SHT, I've seen situations like yours 100 times. It doesn't have to make you a bad man," Carly said. I really appreciate that," Lee said, a little happier. "I mean, thank God Lee showed up when he did. Right, Lee?" Mark's voice called out from in front of them. "Yeah, why don't you tell us more about yourself, Lee?" Andy said, as he looked behind himself. "Where are you from?" Danny asked, giving a smile. "I grew up in Macon," Lee said, as Andy spoke up. "Right in the heart of Georgia." "That's what I like to hear," the man said, with a chuckle. Y'all seem pretty settled in for yourselves at that motor inn. Who's running things over there? Andy asked, as Izuku became somewhat suspicious about their questions. We work as a group, all of us looking out for each other. Lee said, not wanting to talk about their leadership issues. I hear that. There are so many dumbasses out there fighting each other these days, it's just stupid. Andy said, as Danny was shown looking ahead. How many people you got over there, anyway? Danny asked, looking at Lee. Now Izuku was downright extremely suspicious as he looked at Carly as the older woman just kept walking ahead of him. Tapping on her sleeve, she looked down to him and noticed his suspicious expression on his face as he glared at the two men from this supposed St. John dairy. Is something wrong? She asked. They're asking us far too many questions about us. We haven't even asked them about their place, who knows whether or not they're allies or enemies. Izuku said, as Carly nodded her head. So you are trying to make sure that some of us are prepared for if things go wrong with this family? Carly asked, as Izuku nodded. We don't know them, but the fact that they found the inn, means that they weren't that far away from the motor inn. It seems as though they have their eyes on it. Izuku muttered. I can't see how that pertains to their actions towards us. Carly said, looking a little skeptical of Izuku's suspiciousness. Just listen to the way they ask Lee and the others about the group, you'll see what I mean. Izuku said, as they listened further. Enough to defend ourselves. Lee said, looking at Danny now. Well, that's good. It's getting dangerous out there, well you guys know. Andy said, as he gave a grim expression. Welp, we'd love to get you all out to the dairy, like I said, we got plenty of food and quite frankly we could always use a helping hand. Andy continued. In the summers, I used to help out on a goat farm. Ben said, as Danny replied to Ben's comment. Yeah, that's great. Everything helps. Danny said, as Izuku looked at Carly. See what I mean? Izuku whispered. I don't really see it, but I'll keep an eye out for anything suspicious about their words. Carly said, as they continued. Mama's been running the dairy for about as long as I can remember, but now it's Dash, Andy said, before a new voice called out from the forest. You think you're gonna kick me out of this? The voice called out angrily. SHT, get down. Andy said, as everyone crouched down to get out of sight. No one's trying to cut you out of anything. The bandit said, as they talked to one another. You and Gary are always bumming the SHT dash, the bandits continued arguing as Danny spoke up. DMN bandits. He growled quietly. Who? Lee asked. Those look like the people who raided my camp. Ben said, words. Somewhat scared. You're the one who's always psing on everything. The bandits continued to argue in the background. Who are they? Lee asked. Sho, Andy said, as the bandits' voices came back into hearing range. Fu. You knew we were hungry. F assholes are what they are. Andy said, whispering. There's only 2 of them. Carly said, holding her gun. Oh no, there's plenty more of them. Danny said, as the 2 bandits argued in the background even more. What are you gonna do about it? The second bandit questioned the first. Don't worry, Danny and I got you guys covered if something happens. But let's just wait this out, hope they move on. Andy said, as they all watched the interaction as the first bandit kicked the second one backwards. Fu. Bang. Bang. Fu. Fu. Bang. The bandit said, shooting the dead corpse of his ally. Jesus. Carly whispered, watching from behind a tree. But the bandit said, walking back into the woods. The world out here has gone to SHT. Come on, let's get you to the dairy where we know it's safe. Andy said, as they all stood up and left. Izuku however walked over to the bandit whilst everyone wasn't watching as he picked up a gun from the bandit's body. Looking over the small firearm, he put it in his pants with the safety on pointing downward as he covered it up with his shirt. Walking over to the group, he found that they were a bit of a ways away before he switched the gun's placement with his hip before catching up with them. If they were going to continue being suspicious, then he was going to make sure that he was prepared for if they attacked the group. He was already suspicious of their kind behavior to them all. Nobody's this nice in the apocalypse. He's already dealt with people who hide their real personalities behind a mask before, and he could easily see it from a mile away. It didn't matter if he was in a new world or not, he could see someone wearing a mask over their expression faster than anyone. How, you may ask? Because he did the same thing to his own mother for over 10 long years. He knows someone is wearing a mask over themselves when he had done it for over a decade. Starved for help, Pete, too. After the entire group had arrived at the farm, they saw all the land belonging to the St. John's as they moved towards the front gates. Izuku was keeping an eye out for people who could be threats as Carly and Lee talked to one another. Izuku kept a close eye on Danny and Andy as they were talking about how nobody comes to the farm anymore. Not since they lost a couple of farm hands who used to work for them in the past at the start of this whole walker infestation. But before he could think about anything that could incriminate the St. John's even further than how they acted, a very large woman had showed up. "I thought I saw y'all with company comin' down the drive," a woman said, in a thick southern accent. "Guys, this is our mama," Andy said, as Izuku stared at the woman. "I'm Brenda St. John and welcome to the St. John Dairy," Brenda said, introducing herself. "This here's Lee. He's from Macon," Andy said, introducing Lee to the woman. "A couple of our farm hands were from Macon. They grow good there," Brenda said, causing Izuku to become suspicious of her wording. "They got a few more friends staying at the old motel," Danny explained as the woman looked at them with something akin to mock concern. "Oh, my goodness, that place is pretty vulnerable. Have you got someone with survival experience to lead your group?" Brenda asked, curiously. "We all work together. Plus we've got plenty of people with military experience," Lee said, as Brenda nodded. "Well, that's good to hear. That motel ain't the safest place," Brenda explained. "Now that y'all are here, we'll make sure you're safe and comfortable," Brenda continued. "Does that offer apply to the rest of us?" Lee questioned, looking concerned. "We're all incredibly hungry," Carly said, further informing Brenda about their food situation. "These are for y'all. Baked fresh this morning," Brenda said, handing over a basket of biscuits. "Amazing," Carly said, staring at the food. "Can't get stuff like that anymore, not without a cow for milk and butter, that's for sure," Danny said, further inciting the group to wish to stay with them. "That's right. Hopefully Maybelle will make it through this bout of whatever she's got and be with us for a good long while," Brenda said, worriedly. "Your cow is sick." "What's she?" Lee went to ask before being interrupted. "We have a vet. We could bring her here. We can help your folks out," Mark said, as Izuku just stared at the man like he was an idiot. "A vet? Oh, my. Our prayers have been answered," Brenda celebrated through words. "Maybe our whole group could come for the day," Mark said, further trying to allow everyone to come here. "Well, how about this, y'all go bring your veterinary friend. And I will prepare some dinner, a big feast for all you hungry souls," Brenda suggested as she continued. "It'll be nice to have some folks to help out around again. Danny, why don't you help me out in the kitchen?" Brenda said, as Danny followed after her with a nod. "Why don't I head back with the food and round up everyone for the trip back here?" Carly suggested. "You might want to bring someone with you. Remember, those roads can be dangerous," Andy said, as Carly retorted whilst showing her weapon. "I can handle myself," she said, as Mark gave her a rifle. "Here, take this. Why don't you go ahead and take Ben along anyway?" Mark said, as Carly nodded. "Take care of yourself, Lee. See ya in a while." Carly said, walking back to the motor inn with Ben. Izuku inspected the entire farm from where he stood. It was a really big plot of land, although that brought the fence that surrounded the entire place as he stared at the multiple dead bodies on it. He looked over at a small generator that sat near the fence itself as he walked over to it, gaining Andy's attention as the man walked over. Inspecting the farm. Don't worry about the place. We're as safe as can be so long as the fence is filled with electricity. Andy said, as Izuku shook his head. It's not that I don't think this place is safe, I just want to make sure that it's childproof. Children can do many stupid things. Izuku said, lying through his teeth. Yeah, you can say that again. Me and Danny used to do many stupid things in our youth, probably around your age. What was your name? Again. Andy questioned with a smile. The name's Midoriya. I came to America about 1.5 years ago to learn from the States, but I was visiting the suburbs of Atlanta before finding Lee and the others. Izuku said, as Andy nodded. Ah, so you're someone from outside the country. How's the country you came from? Andy asked. I'd rather not talk about it. Izuku said, looking away, rubbing his arm. As soon as Andy left Izuku alone, he walked over to Lee and Mark as the two were inspecting the yard of the farm. They were talking to one another about the place as it seemed truly safe from the world outside of the electric fence. But as soon as Andy was walking over to them both, they stopped their conversation as Izuku paid very close attention to the generator. Mark, Lee, why don't you take a look around? Once you get settled in, I could use some help securing the perimeter. Andy said, as Lee and Mark agreed. Is there a problem? Lee asked, curious. Sometimes, the dead get tangled up in the fence before they fry and end up knocking over a post. It'd be a big help if you two could walk the perimeter. Andy explained. You can learn a little something about our fence. I'm gonna go top off the generator before they run dry. Come get me when you're ready. Andy continued before walking away. You betcha. Mark said. This place is incredible. It's got food. And that fence, oh man, that fence. If we play our cards right, this might turn out to be a place we can stay. So, how do you want to play this? Mark asked Lee as Izuku walked up. Before we can think about bringing our whole group here to stay, we need to figure out if this place is as safe as they say. Lee replied as Mark nodded. Right. Obviously, they think it's safe, but is it safe for the kids? I noticed a broken swing over there. Not a big deal, but maybe there's other things not working that we just can't see yet. Mark said, as Lee continued. Then checking the fence perimeter sounds like a decent way to get a good look at their defenses. Lee said, as Izuku spoke up. What do you want me to do, Lee? Izuku asked, as the man looked at him. I thought you went back to the motor inn with Carly. Lee said, a little surprised. I won't leave you two all alone here. I don't trust the St. John's. They have masks over their expressions. Izuku said, catching Mark's attention. What do you mean, masks? Mark questioned. The way they act is far too kind for a normal farm in the middle of the apocalypse. Lee was very lucky to have met Herschel a few months ago, but finding another farm family that is just as kind. I don't trust that. Izuku said, as Mark looked to Lee. I mean, he makes a fine point, Mark. Lee said, as Mark shook his head. Are you always going to be distrusting to others? Mark asked, as Izuku just glared at him. I don't trust people because of how I was raised. The moment I see someone acting kind towards us, I will make sure that they have a reason to be kind. People have used kindness to screw with me before this whole mess started. I will not be trusting of some happy smiles and kind words. Izuku spoke angrily. Okay, but I am putting at least some trust into them. It pays to be optimistic than it does to be pessimistic. Mark said, walking away as Lee looked at Izuku. Any other reasons as to why you think that the St. John's are not nice and or kind? Lee asked. Well, I noticed a certain certificate on the wall outside their house. Izuku said, pulling out the certificate. Lee looked at it closely before noticing the date on the certificate itself. It was an award for being a great farm, and apparently, they hadn't earned a new one before this ever since. As Lee stared at it for a bit longer, he looked to Izuku with a confused expression before asking him the question on his mind. Is there any reason as to why you're showing me this? Lee asked. Lee, have you heard of the game Mortal Kombat? Izuku asked. Well, yeah, but I don't see why that is a problem. Lee said, as Izuku sighed. Lee, what year is it? Izuku asked, as Lee spoke again. If I remember correctly, around, Lee said, in a questionary manner. Lee, it hasn't won an award since Mortal Kombat 2 was released. Izuku said, as the man went to make a retort before sighing. I guess you're right. But what are you implying about the farm because of an award? Maybe they just didn't get an award since they never went to the area to get said award. Lee said, trying to be optimistic. Lee, if someone doesn't bother to collect a new award, that means that they decided to allow their farm to lose its standing with all other farms in the known area. The place since 1993 had probably become a terrible place since then. Izuku reasoned. Oh, all right. You win. What do you suggest we do? Lee said, looking at him. I say we collect our food and just never return. Have Katja fix their cow and just be done with the place. I don't trust them to give me the correct food, Lee. And I certainly do not think that they are nice people to want to hand out food during an apocalypse where most of humanity has gone missing or are dead. Let's not forget to mention the fact that meat products are going bad through the people dying before they can even take care of the meat properly. Izuku said, walking away from the man. Lee walked over to Andy St. John as the man was seemingly working on the small generator. As he looked over it, he watched as the man worked HRD on it just to make sure it was in fine working condition. As Lee was looking over the machine, Andy looked up at him with a smile before initiating conversation with the man. Hi. Andy said, standing up. Hi. Lee replied. Well, I'm glad you guys decided to help us out. I noticed back at the motel that you folks are pretty well armed. You been stockpiling, huh? Andy questioned. We've scraped together a good supply in the last few months. How about yourselves? What kind of protection do you have around here? Lee asked, a little worried. We've collected a few guns to protect ourselves, but we really only use them when we go off the property. When we're inside the perimeter, the fence is all we need to keep us safe. Andy said, with a smile. An electric fence is enough to keep out the walkers. Lee asked, a little bewildered. Walkers. Is that what you call them? That's good. The old one wouldn't have, but Mac, he was our foreman, he figured out how to amp it up with the generators. We used to sit out here some nights and watch the sun's beaches sizzle and pop. When they got too close. Closest thing to entertainment these days, I guess. Andy said, as Lee was surprised by that information. These generators are enough to power the whole dairy? Lee asked, a little confused. We got lots. And we gotta keep trading for fuel as much as we can. But they all work together to do the trick. Like us. Andy said, pointing out the obvious. We can't be the first people you've invited up to the dairy. Lee said, knowing that they couldn't have been the first people the St. Johns have ever met. Well, no. We've made similar deals with other folks, trading for gas and food, but ultimately, they moved on, looking for the people they lost contact with. Andy said, as Lee nodded, accepting the information. Mark and I can help you with that perimeter, now. Lee said, as Mark walked up behind him. Oh, good. The fence stops a walker in about 3 or 4 seconds but gets overloaded if we leave the husks out there. Andy said, as Lee pointed out an obvious answer to Andy's problem. You know, Mark and I can clear the fence ourselves if you want to stay here and finish up with the generators. Lee suggested. Well, that'd be great. I'll turn off the northwest section, and if you guys could strp him off and look for any weak points, that'd be a big help. Andy said, as Lee and Mark gave a reply. Sounds easy enough. Lee retorted. Stay attentive, you never know. Andy said, the overbearing feeling of the bandits hanging above them, and with a nod the two men leave Andy alone to the generator. Lee and Mark were seen walking the perimeter of the St. John Dairy as they looked after the fence. They had taken down multiple walkers who were hanging on the fence and pushed them off many times over. They could see Izuku off in the distance talking with Andy before they entered a conversation of their own. Although they were taking in the view of the farm from where they were at as they moved down searching for more walker husks hanging on the fence. So how's the place looking? Is it safe enough for us to stay if we can? Mark asked. Yeah, it's pretty amazing what they've done with this dairy. But let's see what it takes to secure this fence before drawing any conclusions. Lee said, staying neutral in his wording. I can't wait until everyone's out here. Everyone besides Larry, Mark said, ending his sentence on the elderly man. Why the hell did you have to tell him I thought he's a racist? As if tensions weren't high enough. Lee angrily questioned. Sorry man. It just popped out. Mark said, feeling guilty now. That guy's a piece of SHT anyway. Lee said, angrily. Relax, you're not making things any better ruling him up. Mark said, as they continued walking. Moving further up the road they find a walker who was laying over the fence as a crow ate from its corpse. It was a disturbing sight to see for the two men, finding the scavenger eating from a walker and wondering if the animals of this world could become walkers as well. It'd be a hard enemy to fight if crows were somehow able to become undead and attack them from above. One scratch or peck from them and your life would be over. There's one. Mark said, as the two approached. You. Mark said, feeling disgusted as Lee kicked its leg. Lee, it's dead. Mark said, a little bluntly. Come on, let's push it off. Lee said, as he saw the arrow on the walker's neck. Maybe the St. John boys were using this guy for target practice. Lee quipped. Poor guy. Mark said. I don't know what got him first, the arrow or the fence. Either way, I hope he was already dead. Lee said, before looking at the fence. Andy said, when this fence is working, the walkers go up like a tree branch on a power line. If those lights are off, that means the fence is off, right? Mark asked. It'd better be. Lee said, as he looked at the walker again. Who do you think he was? Mark asked again. Maybe a farm hand. I dunno. I hope he wasn't like this long before the fence finished him off. Lee said, looking sad for the walker. Yeah. Mark replied as Lee pulled out the arrow and pushed the walker off the fence. Let's go, there's still a few more. Lee said as the two walked off. Once this fence is patched up, this place'll be like a fortress. God, can you imagine not having to worry about the walkers anymore? Mark asked, excited. It's useless without gas. We might need food, but the St. Johns need gas too. Lee retorted. Not many drivers these days, Lee. Mark said, in his argument. We could scrounge up a year's worth of gas, easy. So, what's your take on the brothers? They seem to have this place tied down pretty well. Mark asked, curious. We've got enough people to take this place by force, if we have to. Lee said, as he gave a determined expression. Sheesh, Lee. You sound like Kenny. Mark said, unknowingly dissing Kenny. They continued walking down the outer rim of the fence before finding another hanging over the fence, causing it to seemingly be hanging inward. Moving up towards the walker, they pushed the fence upward before chopping off the walker's hands as it fell backwards onto the ground, leaving the hands on the barbed wire fencing. Never get used to the smell, do ya? Mark quipped. Nope. Lee retorted as they moved on. Christ, I can't stop thinking about dinner. Thanks for the rations earlier. It's not easy eating in front of the kids, but it's all that's keeping me on my feet right now. Mark said, complaining a little. I'm hungry too, Mark. Lee said, agreeing with the man. Do you think they're gonna be good for it? Dinner for a whole group of people? Mark asked, curiously. If they've got as much food as they say, I think so. Lee said, as they found another walker. The walker was near a small still as the fencing was hanging outside of the inner limits of the dairy. Come on, I think I see where they're getting in. This one must have knocked it over trying to get through. Mark said, walking through the barbed fence. He's tangled up in there pretty good. Come on, help me get this thing back in place so we can get Mr. Crispy off of here. Mark said, as Lee spoke up. I think we'd get better leverage from other side. Lee said, as Mark replied. Good idea. As soon as Lee made it to the outer part of the fence, the outer layer of the dairy's territory, he picked up the post with Mark. As soon as they got it standing upright, they were clearing their hands from the dirt when the fence started up with the lights on. The walker still connected to the fence had begun to be electrocuted even though it was already long dead. Holy F. What just happened? Mark called out surprised. The fences are on. Lee said, surprised as well. Why the hell would he turn the fence on? He knows we're out here. Mark called out just as confused. And with that sentence stated, just before Lee could give a reply. The sound of something flying through the air gathered their attention, and before Mark could turn around to see what was going on, something smacked right into his right shoulder. Looking closer from Lee's perspective, it was an arrow that came from the woods behind them both. Ow! Mark cried out in surprise. Starved for help, Pete, 3 Izuku was currently walking around the other edge of the farm as he kept an eye out for any walkers that might sneak up on the farm. He was also keeping an eye out for the rest of the group from the motor inn so that he could inform them about the situation at hand. To think that he was delegated to be a lookout for the St. John family was very devaluing to him. Shaking his head at the thought, he turned around and made his way back to the farm as he thought about how he should complete his research on the family. He knew that there was definitely something wrong with the place, considering they've never gotten a certificate for having a great farm ever since the early 1990s. Ow! Mark's voice cried out as Izuku came closer to where Lee and Mark were located. What in the world? Izuku muttered. He ran over to another opening in the gate as he saw Mark and Lee rushing over to where they would be rushing up from. And as soon as Mark entered his view, Izuku pulled out some bandages and suture equipment as he rushed over to the two men. As soon as Mark was within view, Izuku made sure that the young man was on the ground kneeling as he immediately got right to work. Pulling out the arrow from the man's back, he pulled out the needle and thread from his pocket as he started to sew his back together. Can you two tell me what in the world happened out there? Izuku asked, bewildered. Mark got shot by with an arrow. Lee said, as Izuku gave a deadpan sigh. I meant what happened outside the fence. Izuku said, as Lee told him what happened. So you're telling me that in the time that I took my eyes off of him he turned on the fence and nearly got you and Mark killed? Izuku asked, as Lee nodded. Okay, they are definitely trying to do something with one of you. The fact that Mark was hurt means that this was part of their plan. Just act as though you don't suspect them of anything. Izuku said, as the two saw Andy rushing over. Sure thing. Lee retorted as Andy spoke up. What in the hell happened? Andy asked, sounding shocked. Mark got shot with an arrow. I thought that we'd be safe out there, and why did you turn on the fence? We weren't back behind it. Lee questioned. I saw your arms hanging in the air from afar. I thought you were giving me the go-ahead to turn the fence on. I'm really sorry. Andy said, sounding slightly guilty. As they were discussing what had happened, the rest of the group from the motor inn had decided now was a good time to show up. And as soon as they were entering the area where the farm was located, they saw Mark on the ground in pain as he was being bandaged by Izuku. Kenny however took note of how Izuku had finished stitching Mark up and covered the man's back with bandages. "Mark! Oh my God!" Katja called out. "Jesus, Mark, what happened?" Lily asked. "Are you going to be alright?" Kenny asked. "I'm going to be fine. Just need to rest for a bit," Mark said, as Izuku looked at the others. "He was shot by one of the bandits in the forest most likely. We came across them on our way to the farm earlier today. I stitched his wound up as best as I could before bandaging it. I couldn't clean it with anything since I didn't have any hydrogen peroxide," Izuku said, as everyone nodded. "Oh my, you're hurt. Let me bring you inside to rest up," the St. John's mother said, as she helped Mark up the stairs to the building. That was some excellent work on bandaging him up, especially with your suture skills. Had to do that before?" Kenny asked Izuku once they were as far away from everyone. "You don't live in a world where everyone hates your mere existence without learning a few tricks," Izuku said, grimacing. "Don't worry, kid, we'll make sure that you don't need to worry about that kind of thing for a long while," Kenny said, patting his shoulder. After a few hours of staying on the farm, Izuku started to get antsy as he looked around the place once again, gaining the attention of Andy. Looking behind himself at how the man was making his way over to him, Izuku just looked up at him when the man walked up to him. Andy opened his mouth to say something before he sighed and took a deep breath to look into Izuku's emerald iris. "I know that you don't trust everyone here. But I just want you to know that I really am sorry about what happened to your friend. It was never my intention to have one of your people get hurt," Andy said, as Izuku looked at him with a deadpan expression. "I am not the leader of the group, you should be telling that to either Lee, Lily, or Kenny. I'm just someone that Lily hates for no good reason, and Lee made sure that me and Clementine survive out here," Izuku said, walking away from the man. "Hey, Izuku, come here for a moment," Lee said, as Izuku walked over to the man. Izuku arrived at an old tree that held a swing on it as Izuku looked up at the much taller man. Taking a deep breath, he saw that Lee was holding a rifle on his back as Izuku tilted his head at the action. Lee nodded over towards Danny, who was waiting near the gate, as Izuku knew what the man would be asking. Nodding at Lee as if to tell him to head out and that he'll keep an eye on Clementine, Lee walked over to the gate. "Thanks for looking after Clementine. I will make sure to find something to get you at some point," Lee said, as Izuku happily nodded. "Just make sure that you return without getting hurt, you know how much Clementine looks up to you, Lee," Izuku said, as Lee patted his head. "I still don't know how you are able to get your matted hair so soft," Lee said, as Izuku shook his head. "Just head out already, we need to prepare for dinner." "Not that I am all that thrilled about it," Izuku said, as Lee nodded before leaving. When Izuku watched as Lee walked away, he moved back over near Clementine as she was having fun using the swing. He had also taken a shift away from Kenny so that the man could spend time searching the place to make sure that it is as safe as Andy tells them. As Izuku is pushing Clementine and Duck on the swings, he couldn't help but think about the times when he was a kid. He smiled at the memories that he'd had about his life before coming here, about a time where he had no need to worry about bullies chasing him through the streets. Back when his old friend turned bully had been someone who he looked up to greatly, someone who he saw as an idol of victory. Shaking his head at the incoming thought, Izuku moved after pushing Clementine and Duck enough that they wanted to look at Mabel the cow. Following the two towards the barn, Izuku was about to enter the place when a hand was placed over his mouth, causing him to struggle as much as he could before he passed out. Although if he knew by the size of the hand that had been on his mouth, he knew for a fact that it was Andy, since Lee and Danny hadn't returned yet. After a while of being unconscious, Izuku woke up in the middle of the room as he took in his surroundings. Hearing movement outside of the place he was hidden within, he started to look at the place he was placed inside of. Looking down at himself to make sure nothing happened to him, he let out a sigh of relief as he tried to find a way out of there. After a small while of not being able to escape from the area, he figured out that the way out was through the air vent that sent cool air into the room. He suddenly gained the thought that he was inside of a meat locker, and he heard the sounds of Lee talking to someone outside of the room. Rushing to the door of the room, he banged his hands on the door trying to gain the attention of Lee from inside. But it appeared as though it was soundproofed since he could gain the attention of Lee as the man had left. Sitting down on one of the salt licks in the locker, he tried to think of ways to escape the room without anyone knowing from the farm. He knew that everyone would be thinking about where he'd gone, so he needed to inform them about what happened as soon as he could. To think that he was taken advantage of when his guard was lowered even the slightest bit, he needed to be more productive when he was alone. He ended up falling asleep again in the room since there was literally nothing to do as he waited for everyone. He knew that if he fell asleep, they would have enough time to wait until they were attacked again. So when he woke up again, imagine his surprise when he found Andy tossing everyone into the room with an unconscious Lee in front of him. Everyone suddenly took notice of his presence as well as he rushed over to Lee in order to try and wake him up. That was when he heard Andy speak up. "I wouldn't have had to do this if you weren't so gung-ho about searching the place. We do what we need to in order to survive," Andy said, before slamming the door behind him shut. "What in the world just happened?" Izuku asked, as he looked at Clementine. "They tried to make us eat a human," Clementine said, stuttering a bit. "Well, the rest of us ate a human, god damn it. If it weren't for this unconscious bstrd not moving fast enough," Larry said, as he kicked Lee's unconscious form. "Hey. What is your problem with him? He's literally done everything he could to make sure you survive," Izuku said, as Larry glared at him. "Says the one who has been causing my daughter issues," Larry said, poking Izuku in the chest. "Like what?" Izuku asked, giving the man a blunt expression. "Everything you've done so far in terms of siding with Kenneth and Lee. You all deserve each other," Larry said, as Izuku sighed. "Do you have anything that I can use to pull the screws on the air conditioner?" Izuku asked. "Like what?" Larry questioned a bit angrily. "Oh, I don't know, like some coins or a flat screwdriver," Izuku asked, as Clementine spoke up. "I don't have much, but I have a rock," she said, as Izuku shook his head. "I don't need a rock, Clem, I need something to unscrew some screws," Izuku said, softly as the girl nodded. "Oh, I have $60 on hand, now get us out of here," Larry said, as Izuku shook his head. Moving over to the wall, Izuku began the process of unscrewing the screws from their placement on the air conditioner. He was in the middle of trying to pull the air conditioner off its stand when Lee was waking up. And Larry was not helping things as he was slamming his fists on the door screaming for the people to let them out. Once it was taken off by Izuku and Kenny, Lee assisted them, and they all had decided to have Clementine open the door from the outside. After lifting Clementine up to the vent, Larry had ceased his attacks on the door before he sat down on one of the salt licks. He was panting heavily, as Izuku pulled out a stray nitroglycerin tablet he kept on himself at all times. "Here, take this. It will stop your heart attack from coming up," Izuku said, putting the pill in the man's hand. "You stole one of my pills?" he angrily asked. "It is going to save your life. I made sure to grab one of them from the last time I went to the drugstore if that's what you're asking," Izuku said, as Larry just gulped the pill down. "I may not like you, brat. But thank you," Larry said, as he tried to stand up. "Dad. You shouldn't be standing when you take your pills," Lily said, worrying over her father. "Don't worry about me, Lily, I'll be fine. Just make sure that we can get out of here," Larry said, as Lily looked down to Izuku. "Look, I'm sorry for treating you the way I have been. It's just becoming harder to live out here without supplies from Macon. Especially when you stop heading out there to collect supplies," Lily said, as Izuku shook his head. "It's fine, I wanted to keep myself safe and at least get some kind of rest. You had been keeping me out on supply runs for a long while before this happened," Izuku said, as they watched the door to the room be opened up. Clementine walked into the room finding Larry sitting on another pile of salt licks as she informed everyone of what was happening. Lee and Kenny left the room with Lily as they had moved through the barn collecting a weapon or two. As Lee and Kenny moved ahead of everyone, Izuku kept Clementine behind himself as he waited for Lee and Kenny to take care of the first threat to their plans. Danny. The man seemed to be cleaning his rifle inside of the barn as he found out about Lee and Kenny's hiding spot as the two men fought. Danny off. Once Lee and Kenny had the man stuck in a bear trap without a release latch, they took off although Lee turned around and stabbed Danny through the chest with a pitchfork nearby. But there was one thing he couldn't get out of his head when he overheard Lee and Danny's conversation and it greatly disturbed him. Why you get it now? You can have me. Danny said, almost as though he was getting off to the idea of being eaten alive. Eating people is not the answer. Lee called out to the downed man. You can't kill me. I'm tainted meat. You'll get sick. Danny said, as Lee retorted to him. You're already sick. Lee said, stabbing the man through the chest, but not before some words from the cannibal. You ain't gonna kill me. Danny said, before he was pierced through the chest with the pitchfork. Ah. Kenny help. Katja's voice called out. Izuku followed Lee outside as he noticed Kenny looking around the place for Andy St. John. Moving to find Andy as well, Izuku followed after Kenny as Lee walked up to the building where Brenda St. John was located with Katja. Izuku eventually found Andy as the man held Duck in his hand by the head with a rifle in his hand. Izuku slowly walked up behind the man before he turned around to see him standing there with an arm behind his back. Don't you move. I know that you are wondering what is wrong. Andy said, as Izuku glared at him. Cannibalism. That is not the answer for solving the food issues, there's not enough of us already. Izuku said, trying to get the man to see reason. We had a good thing going here, why couldn't you just let us live in peace? All we wanted was just some gas. Andy said, hysterically. But hacking the legs off of Mark justifies your reasons for cannibalism. Izuku called out to the man. You wouldn't ever understand what it's like to live on this farm. You aren't a farm boy. Andy called out to him. No, but at least I know that I would never fall into becoming a cannibal to survive. Izuku growled out. Just as he was about to rush the man, a gunshot was heard in the area. Izuku looked at Andy before noticing that his rifle had smoke coming out of it. Looking down at his lower torso he saw something that caused him to gain a fearful expression. His body had seemingly been shot, but he didn't know where. That was before he felt something horribly wrong with his stomach. Looking at his abdomen, he found that right in the middle where his abdomen and his abs met there was a hole there. Just underneath his heart. Placing a hand over the hole, he knelt to the ground as he tried his best to hold in a scream of pain and agony. But he couldn't. Wag.